And Ross is kind enough to stop into the studio and join us today. Hi, Ross.
Hey, how you doing, Matt?
I'm doing well. I wanted to talk with you a little bit today about ethics, and one of the reasons why I want to kind of set this up is that sometimes I'm in the radio business, so sometimes I'll like try to deal with certain clients. I don't know another industry that has as many rules and regulations about what you can and cannot say when it comes to radio advertising, because they have this high bar of ethics standards that you can and cannot say certain things. That's at least the standards I've gotten to, which is really kind of hard when you say, well, we hold the legal institution, whether that's lawyers, judges, the courts, to a higher standard. It's hard then to see what's happening with our judicial system right now, where there is this big question of what is appropriate in regards to, disclosure for judges. And of course, obviously the story that's been in the newspaper is Alito and Thomas and basically getting their vacation homes and houses paid off and vacations across the globe. I think a lot of people are surprised to a point that there aren't even more spelled out ethics in regards to the Supreme Court on something like this.
Right. Totally. So us as lawyers and judges, we're beholden to a code of ethics. For judicial officers and judges, they're beholden to a judicial code of ethics. Lawyers have a professional responsibility board of ethics that oversees all of our conduct. You always hear the thing about, ambulance chasing, right?
Yeah.
You're an ambulance chaser. You're you can't, and that's actually true. Like, you can't go directly solicit clients as a lawyer and just find out a crash and then say, hey, here's my card, right?
Mm-hmm.
The client has to reach out to you without, and you can advertise, but without, your influence, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, this Clarence Thomas thing, it's very surprising because it's an issue of disclosure.
Mm-hmm.
The Ethics in Government Act of 1978, that's the law at issue here with regard to Thomas. He has a duty every year as a Supreme Court judge, and Article 3 judges too in Minnesota, the District of Minnesota. They have a duty every year on May 15th to disclose all gifts that are over, I think it's $166. And for 20 years, Mr. Thomas failed to do that. We're talking trips across the globe, private jets, some real estate transactions, VIP sports tickets, being on a super yacht by this mega donor named Harlan Crow. So it's an issue of judicial transparency, and we're talking, the tally could be in the millions.
Well, and it's also it's basically money funded from groups who have an interest in the cases that are coming before the Supreme Court. I mean, it's not just you're getting a trip. You're getting a trip in some cases from people who have a vested interest in how the rulings of the Supreme Court come down.
That's correct. This Harlan Crow is a billionaire, and he has a vested interest in, the turnouts for his businesses as to how these cases go.
Mm-hmm.
Another area of judicial ethics that I find quite interesting is a lot of judges own stock in companies where their Johnson & Johnson comes before them. And if it's a big case, like a big 3M case that could affect shareholder prices, they should be recusing themselves. And the Wall Street Journal report found that 131 judges from 685 cases from 2010 to 2018 failed to recuse themselves in cases where they had a vested financial interest in a party.
I will buy that a handful of those cases might not be aware they have stock in the company. They might be in some sort of thing. I'll buy that. But it's clear that there are a lot of judges who know exactly what they've got. And it's like, oh, it's, and we'll just, company ABC. I have, 2,000 shares of company ABC. I don't think this is a vested interest, although clearly then the question is could you even rule in that case, knowing that if I rule the wrong way, I'm going to lose money on this?
Right. It's an unconscious bias, even if you have a little bit of stock. And I mean, the judge should just recuse themselves. Who cares? It's less work for them.
Yeah.
Go on to the next case if you have a little bit of stock, even if it's a little bit, just to avoid that appearance of impropriety. And we hold our judges to a really high standard here in this country, and more recusals like that would go a long way in ensuring public trust.
Well, and then it goes the opposite way. The fact that you didn't recuse yourself leads us to believe that then maybe you did want to influence this case. That, you forget about your attempt of being, unbiased. The fact that you stayed on this case, maybe you were concerned that another judge might actually rule in a way that you lose money. So probably it's best I stay on this case, which is, once again, coming at it from the other side of it, but it's still just as valid.
Totally. Absolutely, Matt.
I watched I'm going to go back to something you first said. I watched The Verdict, Paul Newman, fantastic film. I love that film. One of the best law films of all time. And of course, the beginning of that movie, he's showing up at funeral parlors and handing out cards and stuff like this. You see ambulance chasing like this. Is it kind of one of those things? And he's being very clear. It's like, I'm here if you have any questions. He's not saying I want to be your lawyer. He's just handing them the cards. Like, if you have any questions, please just be in touch, sort of thing. Do we have standards against that stuff? I mean, that movie was 1981, I think it was. Do we have standards against that stuff nowadays?
I mean, I guess yes. Don't do that if you're a lawyer. Don't go to a funeral parlor and hand out your card, to folks like that, hoping to drum up business. Yeah, don't do that, I would advise. But yeah, there are standards against direct solicitation like that in our code of ethics.
I would say The Verdict or Michael Clayton, best two law films ever made, I think, hands down. Phenomenal. But also having to deal a lot with ethics on this. Now, going to the Supreme Court, you had mentioned to me before we went on the air that this is, getting stuff like this, it's stuff that's happened in the past. It's just you need to disclose it. That RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she basically took a flight and she disclosed it, correct?
Right. Yeah. She took a flight for a free flight to Israel from, a billionaire, I think in 2017 or 2018. But the point is she disclosed it on her financial disclosures. So it's an issue of public trust. Okay, you did this. And if this case pops up where this person that gave you the free flight is involved, you better be sure you should recuse yourself. So it's an issue of building public trust and knowing that, you're doing these certain things. Where it becomes a problem is what Mr. Thomas did, where you have over 20 years of undisclosed free gifts, free flights, luxurious vacations. And so now your ethics are being called into question. So what's really going on here? Why don't you want to tell us about this? What's going on here?
Well, and I will say this is just me personally. If I know this, I'll tell you what, Thomas and Alito, I'll get you the super duper arm wristband over at the Mall of America, place for fun in your life. We'll do some rides and stuff. You just have to make sure common sense gun regulation is passed. And before you kind of get mad at me and joking about this, I'm not the one who's doing this. They're the ones that basically have turned have undermined the legitimacy of the Supreme Court with this stuff. It's interesting in this, the case in Atlanta right now with Trump and Fulton County. One of the things I've seen is that there's a lot of criticism of the lawyers. That there's a conflict of interest, or this person might have donated to some campaign or something like this. There's a lot of scrutiny with lawyers. It does seem like when it comes to these ethics, that the lawyers definitely get a little bit more attention than the judges do. And I think we're kind of getting the idea. It's like, no, we probably should be paying attention to what's going on with the judges too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, both sides, have most lawyers are or most judges are lawyers in their past life, obviously. Well, they all are. But it's absolutely a question of, doing the right thing. Most of the stuff is kind of self-explanatory, but so us as lawyers, like we have ethical lawyers where if we do, have an ethical question, we call that person and we, get their opinion on whether you can or you can't do something. Because there is a lot of gray areas, that are called into question. Some, with these Trump guys or whatever, it seems like they knew what they should and should not be doing, but they did it anyway.
Well, in versus, and it's once again, it's interesting because you have this judge now, and I'll bring up another case, the case down in Kansas where the newspaper was raided, which is a pretty clear First Amendment violation. They went in there. I mean, there is the police chief is trying to make an argument saying, well, if they feel there's a crimes happen. Yeah, but you can't, just because you don't like the news story covered, that's not a crime. And that's violating the First Amendment, but a judge signed off on that. And there's a question you have to ask yourself as a judge is like, okay, you do understand this is in that case, you'd almost want to fault on the side of the Constitution and say, you need to really bring me evidence of a crime here if I'm going to basically confiscate computers and cell phones from a newspaper. And they didn't. Quickly, by the way, the county down there basically ordered them to give everything back because they said there's no crime here that can justify this. But once again, it's you got sometimes it does seem like, okay, a judge here signed off on this. That this is a clear-cut violation of the Constitution, First Amendment of the Constitution, freedom of the press. Yet it for some reason it just doesn't click in. I probably should not, there's an ethics here that I have to uphold here and not just go with what my buddy is saying he needs me to do.
Right, right. I mean, here's the thing about the law, Matt, is if a judge wants a ruling to come out a certain way, it is going to come out that way. And you can bend the law, you can find a case on point, you can, bend the facts the way that you want. You can find in every single case, you can find an out if you want that out. And you can, if a judge wants a case to come out a certain way, it will come out that way. It's just how it is.
Without getting into details, how many times have you ever had to recuse yourself from a case? Conflict.
Because of a conflict of interest, a couple times. Okay. It doesn't happen all that often, but if there is a conflict of interest where, I have represented a party before, where I have some inside baseball knowledge or something like that, then I'm not going to touch that.
But you also have a firm that basically you have enough, players on the bench that if you need to step aside because of that conflict, you definitely have someone there that can step in generally, correct?
Right. What you can do is if there's a conflict of interest with like me personally, you can be what's called walled off from the case. So you don't know anything that goes about it. Like a firewall goes up between you and, the case that's, at your law firm. It's a very common practice that happens at really large law firms, yes. Obviously with, thousands of lawyers because, there probably will be some sort of conflict. And every time at a case at its inception, the firm does a conflict check. Do you know these people, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And everybody kind of signs off on it, typically speaking at my law firm and at larger law firms for sure.
It's different though, because that process seems fairly straightforward. I guess I got to be careful here because I don't want to get you into trouble in any capacity. Have you ever come across a case yourself or have heard of a case where all of a sudden you become aware the judge has a massive conflict of interest? If you have something like that, is there a process for the legal team to be able to make an appeal in some sense? Or is that just after the trial? You just have to wait for the trial to go through and then that's the only recourse you have? No,
you can make a motion to have the judge recuse themselves for sure. Has it ever come across in a case that I had? The closest thing that I had is it was a case that was in federal court where the opposing attorney was representing the company. And the opposing attorney was a judicial law clerk for the judge that was hearing the case.
Okay.
And technically that's okay because it was outside of I think it's like a 2 or 3 year time period where that person clerked for the actual judge seeing the case. But I got ruled against in that case, and I wasn't very surprised. And I wish I could have, removed the judge from that case, but it was in federal court, and you don't have that right.
So in that case, and depending on what your jurisdiction is, so if in that case, was there then? And I don't want to necessarily talk about your case, but is then the option is the appeal process and say, well, we've become aware of this massive conflict of interest with the judge that they had. Is it on the judge then to prove that the conflict of interest didn't weigh on their ruling?
In that particular case, we did appeal, but the absence of recusal was, or the failure of the judge to recuse herself from that case was not the issue on appeal, simply because the attorney that was representing the company in that case was a law clerk for her, but it wasn't within like the 2 year time period. So technically speaking, as a matter of, what was written in the code of ethics, the judge wasn't in violation there. So it's unfortunate. I think she should have just recused herself, in general, just because of the appearance of impropriety, but it actually wasn't a violation. So we didn't appeal that specific issue. I'm just
going to hypothetical this. If you say you had a case where all of a sudden you had a judge who, although didn't have to recuse himself from cases, was 20-0 for the former law clerks for them that came before them, would that be enough to basically be able to say, okay, wait a minute, here's a clear pattern that if you were a law clerk for this judge, you're going to get the ruling?
I don't know. That'd be tough. I would like to make that argument and do an analysis like that, but that would be tough. It was if the person was inside that 2-year time period or whatever, and the judge like failed to recuse herself, and there was a clear violation there, then sure, that's an appealable issue. Absolutely.
Yeah, clearly for judges, this is kind of gets into the political realm that we have to, wherever the judges are, whether state judges, county judges, federal judges, that we need to have politicians, basically the Congress, set up rules that basically say you can't do this sort of thing. Although I'm kind of to a point still stunned as this story with Alito and Thomas came out. What do you mean there aren't rules about this? This seems like it would be the most no-brainer of all time. That's where the pressure for the judges, at least, that has to come from the political realm, correct?
Yeah, and especially with federal judges, there's this the law that I referenced, and that's at issue with Thomas in particular, is the Ethics and Government Act of 1978. And with regard, and Mr. Thomas is saying, hey, you know what? There's a food, lodging, and entertainment exemption. I didn't have to disclose these lavish gifts because of this exemption. Well, okay, but it's not like you're getting taken to lunch at Applebee's here.
Yeah. Well, maybe Applebee's in Monaco, which I guess is better than the standard Applebee's. For lawyers, once again, it comes down to the fact that, there does seem to be a lot of rules and regulations in place. And, a respectable law firm like MJSB, Employment Justice, is going to make sure that they're following the ethics rules to make sure that you're getting the representation that's fairest for you, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, the last thing that you want as a lawyer is to be, disciplined by the board of professional responsibility. That is so we're not lawyers. If you're a good one, you don't want to put your law license in jeopardy ever.
Mm-hmm. So people have questions about a law case, would like to talk to you about employment justice, they should get in touch with you, correct?
Absolutely. Yep. MJSB Employment Justice. Ross Stadheim here.
All right. What's the website?
www.mjsbjustice.com.
MJSBjustice.com. I'll link to all the social media accounts as well. I always do there. Ross, as always, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on in today.
Thanks, Matt. It was fun.
My pleasure.
All right.
Ross Stadheim with MJSB Employment Justice. Let's take a break. Come on back. It's the Matt McNeil Show right here on AM 950.